When Okanos first asked me to review their new Cyper 7 PC case, I almost passed. I just wrapped up their Aqua series. Decent cases, but with all the fresh tech hitting the shelves right now, I wasn't sure I'd have time to squeeze in a budget case. But wow, am I glad I did. The Cyper 7 might just be the most versatile case I've reviewed in a long time, and at only 83 bucks, it's probably the best value ATX case out there right now. Let's take a look. Hey guys, CJ with Elevated Systems, and today we're diving into the Cyper 7 from Okanos, a mid-tower ATX case that brings some features, materials, and style that you wouldn't expect at under 90 bucks. We're gonna break it all down. We'll run through the specs and features and build quality, install my standard test system and see how the build goes, check out its thermals and acoustic performance, and in the end, figure out just what kind of value this case brings to DIY builders out there. The Okanos Cyper 7 is a mid-tower ATX case that's pretty well rounded for its size and price. It measures 476 millimeters long, 210 millimeters wide, and 486 millimeters tall, and is compatible with mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards. You can fit GPUs up to 415 millimeters long, tower coolers up to 165 millimeters high, and ATX power supplies up to 240 millimeters in length. This case packs 4 120 millimeter PWM fans right out of the box, 3 up front for intake and 1 in the back for exhaust. The top panel is open and can house either 3 120 or 2 140 millimeter fans. On the right side, a removable panel opens up spots for 2 additional 120 millimeter fans, and the bottom can hold another 2 120 millimeter fans, drawing air through a mesh side panel. All told, you can load up to 11 fans in this case, and for the liquid cooling crowd, you can install a 360 millimeter up top or in the front, plus there's room for a 240 millimeter side mounted radiator. Just know that if you go that route, it limits your GPU length to just 280 millimeters. Keeping things clean, the Cyper 7 has magnetic removable filters on top and on the right side, plus a clip-in filter under the PSU. The front intake panel uses a 1.5 millimeter mesh steel for added airflow. You've got 7 replaceable PCIe slot covers for horizontal expansion cards. Storage options are flexible too. There's a removable drive sled at the base that fits 2 3.5-inch hard drives or 2 2.5-inch SSDs. Behind the motherboard, there's a tray for another 2.5-inch SSD and 2 extra mounting points behind the side panel, allowing for a total of 5 SSDs. For front I/O, located at the top right side of the case, you've got the power and reset buttons, a headset jack, 2 5 gigabit USB Type A ports, and a 10 gigabit per second USB Type C port. The Okanos Cyper 7 is currently available for $83 on Amazon. The Cyper 7 is mostly made from 22 gauge steel, pretty standard for a case in this price range. The front panel combines plastic and steel mesh, but gets a classy upgrade with real 5mm walnut wood strips running down each side. You can pop off the panel by grabbing the bottom and giving a firm tug. You'll notice the front fans are mounted behind this panel, so they don't eat up any space inside the case. The left panel is a magnetic 3mm tempered glass door on lift-off hinges, making it easy to access. Down below, there's a 1.5mm mesh steel bottom panel for extra ventilation. Speaking of airflow, the plastic side vent cover is a nice touch, keeping air from the front fans directed towards your components instead of leaking out the side. Overall, the build quality here is pretty solid. Real wood accents and tempered glass door, that's not something you typically see at this price point. Now, the steel is on the thinner side, so take care when installing things like fans. A bit too much torque on the screws, and you could bend the steel or pop the screw through the mounting slot. Other than that, it's looking good. The plastic matches the steel color and texture well. The tolerances are tight, no panel gaps or misalignments in sight. Overall, it punches above its weight in terms of material and build quality. But to really judge a case, you've got to build in it, and installing my test system was easy and pretty uneventful, but I did run into a few notes worth mentioning. First, if you're planning to swap out the pre-installed case fans, that bottom front fan can seem tricky to remove. The easiest way to get to the bottom screws is by removing the drive sled and unscrewing them from the right side at the bottom. Now, if you're going with a top mounted AIO, you'll want to keep some clearances in mind. A standard 55mm thick AIO paired with a typical ATX motherboard with a top heat sink that's about 25mm tall should work just fine, and there are no restrictions on RAM height. But if you're using a chunkier AIO like an Arctic liquid freezer or a board with tall VRM heat sinks, you'll need to watch for possible interference. For side fans, standard 25mm thick fans won't interfere with your graphics cards, but an AIO mounted on the side will limit max GPU length to 280mm. A front-mounted AIO also will affect max GPU length, but since the fans can be mounted outside the case, that usually only adds the thickness of the radiator to that'll affect the clearances. One spec I'd question is the CPU cooler height. The official limit is listed as less than 165mm, which I guess is technically true. My 160mm cooler just barely fits with about 3 or 4mm to spare, but a 165mm cooler might touch or even prevent the glass door from fully closing. Cable management was smooth sailing with about 20mm of space behind the motherboard tray and a few Velcro straps. I was able to tuck all the cables away with basically zero effort in under 30 seconds. But for those who like their cables meticulously organized, the space and tie-down points provided are more than enough for a super clean setup. With my standard test system installed, specs are detailed in the description below, I put the Cypress 7 through a series of benchmarks to see how it performs compared to an open air test bench. I ran 3 AIDA64 stress tests for the CPU and 3 20-minute port royal loops for the GPU, and well, the results were just okay. Inside the case, CPU temps stayed exactly the same as on the test bench, while motherboard temps saw just a minor improvement, dropping by a single degree. And during those 3 20-minute port royal loops, the GPU temp also dropped by 1 degree in the case. Now, you'd expect a bit more from an airflow focused case, but here's the catch. The 5 plastic slats on the front panel actually cover about 40% of the intake area, which restricts airflow significantly, as proven by my somewhat unscientific measurements here. For a more practical perspective, running the same thermal test with the front panel removed lowered CPU temps by another 2 degrees and dropped GPU temps by a full 6 degrees. As for noise, the front panel introduces a slight rattle when the system is under full load. With the fans maxed out at 100%, noise levels hit 58 decibels, but at idle, the rattling stops and things quiet down to a silent 36 decibels. Setting the fan curve to a max of just 80% is enough to eliminate the rattle and brings noise down to about 54 decibels without a measurable effect on the thermals. Overall, my only real gripe with the Cypress 7 is the restricted front panel, and I get it, it's about balancing form and function. Not every case can have a wide open mesh front panel. I mean, that setup is very effective, but it's also kind of boring if every single case does the same thing. Plus, I imagine the buyer of a larger mid-tower case like this is probably aiming for a liquid-cooled setup anyway. That said, for an entry-level mid-tier build, this case is a pretty solid choice. The wide range of cooling options, the trendy wood accents, the magnetic glass door, and the clean modern aesthetic on an airflow-focused case are all strong selling points. And let's not forget the value add of the 4 included fans. Now, I know a lot of DIY builders like to bring their own fans, but that's usually the case with enclosures over $100. In the mid-tier range, $50 to $100 cases, builders tend to appreciate when the fans come pre-installed. And I like that these are non-RGB fans. It feels more elegant with the wood trim. If I added anything to it, it'd be white lighting like I did with my graphics card, but that's totally personal preference. But looking at the bigger picture with its flexibility for fans and coolers, solid SSD capacity, quality materials, and features like the tempered glass door, dual 5 gigabit type A ports and 10 gigabit type C port, all for just 83 bucks, this case is a great value. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $67 in 2019 money, right in line with the typical 5-year PC upgrade cycle, making the Okino Cypress 7 a pretty smart buy. But what do you think of the Cypress 7? Is it worth considering for your next build? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and while you're there, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.